all our stories are created for entertainment purposes only.
I ghosted my fiancé after she asked for an open relationship before our marriage. Our history goes way back to our childhood, and I apologize for the length of this story. Jan and I had been friends since we were kids because our parents were lifelong friends. We grew up together and started dating during our teenage years. It felt like our families had more plans for us than we did for ourselves. When I pursued my master's degree, I had to move to another city while Jen stayed in our hometown to work on her nursing degree. After a year of a long-distance relationship, we decided to remain friends and not let the pressure of our relationship control us. We both valued our friendship and dated other people during that time. It was odd because deep down we always knew we would eventually end up back together. Once I graduated, I stayed in the city where I got my master's degree and began working in my field. I eagerly awaited a transfer back to my hometown, and when it finally came through, I was thrilled. At this point, Jen was in a long-term relationship with a nice guy, although I sensed he was somewhat wary of our friendship. Out of respect for their relationship, I took a step back, but Jen and I continued to talk several times a year. My boss and mentor, whom I'll call Paul, was a great guy, and we became good friends. He taught me the ropes, and one day he came down from his office to have a talk. He explained that there was an open position in a foreign city for 2 years, and it would be advertised shortly. He went on to describe the position, and although the salary wasn't huge, it covered all expenses such as rent, hotels, and travel-related costs. Essentially, I would be based in Tokyo and would have to travel occasionally to other Asian cities for a few days here and there. I pondered this opportunity, discussed it with my friends and parents, and Paul mentioned that it was a challenging position but a great chance to prove myself and advance my career. I figured, why not? I could save most of my salary and gain valuable experience. Paul offered to recommend me to the higher-ups, sharing that he had done something similar in the past, and it had greatly benefited his career. So I decided to go for it. The first year was tough, adjusting to the culture and social norms, not just in Japan, but in the other countries I visited for work. One surprising aspect was how open women were to dating foreigners. Everywhere I went, they seemed to have a fascination with foreigners. I had some casual relationships with them, and I made it clear to all of them that I wasn't interested in anything long-term or marriage since I was only staying temporarily. I ended up extending my stay for 2 more years. Paul would visit several times a year, either on vacation or to oversee some work, and I'll admit we had some fun times in a few cities, including Angela's city in the Philippines and a few others. When my contract was finally over, I returned home and made a nice down payment on a house just outside the city. After living in a city of 37 million, I needed some space, haha. I was back home for about a month, and while visiting my parents, I ran into Jen. She and the other guy had broken up a year ago, and we started having more serious conversations, even though we had always stayed in touch over the years. Eventually, we rekindled our romantic relationship. I held back from having closeness as much as I wanted, because I was genuinely afraid of the consequences. You see, I had developed a habit of being with multiple partners while I was in Asia, and I was trying to get a grip on my desires before things got serious with Jan. Everyone, including Jan, knew that I had been dating, but on social media, there were occasional photos of me with different women. My mother even jokingly called me a ladies' man a few times, and to be honest, it wasn't entirely inaccurate. Now this is where things start to take a turn. Jan and I finally slept together, and she was genuinely surprised, to say the least. She noticed that I was different from before, and she meant it in a positive way, suggesting that I seemed more experienced. She asked me some questions, and I must admit that I didn't disclose the exact number of partners I'd had because, even if you divided it by 3, it was still quite high. However, I had no doubt in my mind that I could and would be faithful to her. Unfortunately, this night unintentionally planted a seed of doubt in her mind that would later lead to serious issues. Our families were ecstatic that we were together, as it had always been expected. Things were going well, and after speaking with her parents, I decided to propose. She moved in, and everything seemed perfect. There were a few things that I considered red flags, like Jan asking if I was happy with her. Fast forward to December 2019. Our wedding was planned for June 2020. And, well, we all know how 2020 turned out, right? Christmas was wonderful. But as New Year's approached, we had our first major relationship crisis. I was sitting at my PC working, while Jen and her cousin Tammy, who I've also known since childhood, were going through some wedding-related stuff. Jen asked if we could talk, and Tammy joined us in the living room, taking a seat on the sofa. I moved to the table to have our conversation. She began by asking me not to interrupt her and wanted to discuss something. Then she brought up our differences in the bedroom, expressing her fear that I might not be satisfied with her and could potentially cheat on her. She didn't want our future and our children's lives to be ruined if I were to stray. I started to worry that she was going to break up with me. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, it felt like a bad infomercial with the famous line, "But wait, there's more." Jen surprised me by proposing that we open our relationship. She believed it would help her gain more experience and reduce her insecurities. She assured me not to worry because I was the only man she had ever loved, which was why none of her past relationships had led to marriage. I agreed with her on that point because I felt the same way. At first I thought she must be joking and couldn't be serious about this. It felt unreal. This was a year and a half ago, so I'll do my best to remember the main details. Jen explained that she would only be with random people, never with someone we knew or worked with. It wouldn't happen with the same person more than once, and there would be no emotional connections. I was completely shocked. When I realized she was serious, my heart raced, and I was at a loss for words. I'm not a typically angry or violent person, but at this point, I was yelling. I began to understand why Tammy was nearby. I yelled, accusing Tammy of putting Jen up to this, but Tammy claimed she was just there to support Jen. Jen then suggested that I could have the same freedom under the same rules, but I declined. I was furious, and even now, recalling this, I'm still enraged. I explained that I didn't want one-night stands. I wanted a committed relationship with one person. When she asked who, I looked at Tammy but avoided her eyes and said, "I want to be with Tammy." This shocked Jen, and Tammy wasn't expecting it. She blushed and felt uncomfortable. Jen immediately refused, stating that Tammy was family, someone we both knew, and that it was inappropriate for me even to suggest it. It was like I had entered an entirely bizarre world. Where did this come from all of a sudden? We argued back and forth for a while, and I made it clear that if she went through with this, our relationship would be over. I'm completely against it, and I love her. We can work through anything together, but not this. Frustrated, I stormed off, grabbed my pillow, and went to the guest room. I could hear their conversation downstairs for a bit, and it would have been funny if it hadn't gone on for an hour. I couldn't sleep all night and was a wreck at work the next day. Jen started her 2-week night shift that day, so at least we wouldn't be at home together during this time. We both needed to cool down before revisiting this issue. She left dinner for me in the fridge every day, along with an "I love you" note. She texted me frequently, but I kept my responses short. One Thursday night during her night shift week, I was working on my computer when I noticed an email notification on her account. It turned out to be a hotel reservation at a nice hotel close to my office, a place I knew well from outings with coworkers. I thought maybe she wanted to apologize and take me out for a night. The next morning, I waited for her text or call to invite me, but all she asked was how my day was. Then she mentioned how happy she was that she only had one more night of the night shift. I was puzzled because I wondered how she had one more night reserved at the hotel. I felt sick and stressed at my office. I started browsing dating sites, especially profiles without pictures, hoping to find something. But I couldn't find any evidence of wrongdoing. A colleague named Paul noticed I was a wreck and asked if I wanted to grab lunch. He had always supported my relationship with Jen. I confided in him about the situation, and he suggested we have lunch at a hotel restaurant. I immediately declined, not wanting to go there. He wasn't aware of that part. Reluctantly, we went for lunch, but I couldn't eat and didn't even want to drink. Paul told me I couldn't continue working like this and offered to help me take as much leave as I needed, whether paid or unpaid. I told him I couldn't bear to be at home anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I was hearing wasn't true. I rushed home, packed up as much of my belongings as I could fit in my car, and went back to the office. Paul then suggested that we stake out the hotel and wait for her to check in. I'm no private eye or detective. I felt more like Inspector Clouseau. I was really reluctant, but I needed answers. So we set up in the lounge bar, and I started drinking heavily, still hoping this wasn't real. Around 6:30, Paul tapped me on the shoulder, and there she was at the front desk, not in her uniform. I wanted to explode with anger, scream, yell, cry. I didn't know. We waited for 10 minutes after she got in the elevator, and Paul and I walked to the front desk. I asked the reception to connect me to Jen's room, and it rang. As soon as she answered, I started yelling into the receiver, and she sounded confused. "Jen, I told you that if you did this, our relationship would be over. I'm done," I said, then hung up and left the hotel in a hurry. Now where should I go? I went back to Paul's place, and my phone started blowing up. The only person I called was my dad, and I explained to him in a PG-rated manner what had happened and that I needed to leave town for a while. It wasn't up for discussion, and I feel bad for how I spoke to my old man. My phone didn't stop ringing for 2 days. Everyone and their mother called me, but I didn't answer. I didn't know what to do. The only way I can describe how I felt is like walking underwater. Paul mentioned some financial matters I should take care of to protect myself. I wasn't even thinking about that. The house, the wedding, the car loans. We had separate accounts for everything, one for the wedding and one for house-related expenses. I couldn't care less. The next day, I sent an email to Jan, telling her it would be our last contact. I informed her that I was leaving the city for a while, and the wedding and everything else were off. I called my dad back and talked to him at length. While he was crushed, he understood that I needed time and space. He expressed his hope that we could still work things out. 10 days later, I boarded a plane and flew to Bali. I didn't respond to any of Jen's or anyone else's messages or emails. I didn't even care if I got fired. I wish I could say I had a good time, but I was mostly just drunk. I felt a lot of anger, shame, and resentment about how things unfolded. I stayed in touch with Paul regarding my leave, and after 3 weeks, he asked if I could return to Tokyo to take care of some matters. We discussed the new global virus, and I mentioned the possibility of going back to Canada due to rumors of potential lockdowns. I arrived in Tokyo on March 1st, and it felt good to be back at work, even if it was just for a bit. When I heard about the upcoming lockdowns, Paul suggested I return to Canada, but I insisted on staying until May, thinking it would only be 30 or 60 days. I needed some time to plan my next steps. 30 to 60 days, damn it. I ended up staying in Japan for another year before getting vaccinated. But by that time, I didn't really want to go home. My house was rented out, and I was in touch with my family but refused any information about Jen. On September 21st, I received news that my dad had a heart attack. He was doing well but needed a triple bypass surgery, which is serious but not as dire as it used to be. I wanted to see him just in case. I knew that when I got home it would turn into a messy situation, and I didn't want that. I just wanted to visit my parents and express my gratitude to Paul for everything he had done for me, despite my selfishness. But I knew I'd have to see her, and I had no idea how I would feel or what to expect. I apologize for the length of this message. I left out a lot. Any advice, tips, or criticisms would be appreciated. I'm flying out in 4 hours and will land in about 24 hours. Update 1. After landing, I went to see my dad, who was looking good and actually looking forward to his surgery. My mom is doing well, but she's obviously masking her concern. I spent almost the first 24 hours by his side, and I think we talked about a wide range of topics, but nothing too heavy to avoid stressing him. I reassured him that I'm here for him, but I'm also using this trip to reorganize my life, close some doors, and open some new ones. I've already had a few drinks with him. We chatted back and forth, discussing my dad, work, and he even asked if I had any contact with Jen, to which I replied with a no. He then mentioned that the boss, the old man, wants to see me, but considering my father's situation, I suggested we wait. However, I know I'm in deep, so I agreed to meet with him. I have a list of things I need to accomplish this month, and I might as well start crossing them off. Meeting Jen is one of my priorities. I entered the office for the first time in what feels like a long time. Many familiar faces were missing, and there were a few new ones among the usual suspects. Some people nodded and greeted me as we headed up to the old man's office, a place I had never been before. When we walked in, he gestured for us to take a seat. I had never interacted with the old man before. He does make appearances on the floor from time to time, and people part like the Red Sea when he does. Here's how our conversation unfolded. Old man: "Good morning, gentlemen. This is a closed meeting, and anything discussed here is private, blah, blah, blah." The old man launched into a rant about responsibility and dedication, and I have to admit, he made some valid points. He then turned to Paul and asked why they should keep me on board. Paul chimed in, "He does great work. He has saved accounts and acquired many new ones, and we can't find anyone to do the job for the 20% below market salary like we are paying him. WTF?" Then Paul and the old man burst into maniacal laughter, reminiscent of a scene from a Goodfellas movie. The old man wiped away a tear from his eye and commended Paul as the best VP he has. Feeling slightly slighted, I looked at the old man, and he leaned in. An old man approached me, mentioning that I'd had some problems with my woman and offering advice. He mentioned a guy's name as the source of this wisdom. I might not remember his words verbatim, but here's the essence of it. God gives a woman eyebrows, and she plucks them out and draws new ones. God gives her a face, and she paints a new one over it. God gives her breasts, and she buys a push-up water bra. God gives her a form, and still unsatisfied, she buys slim-fitting clothes to alter that form. If God himself cannot please her, then how can you? Brother, please don't drive yourself crazy. Well, that blew my mind a bit, I must say. The old man looked at Paul. Old man conveyed that he could trust me to handle this properly and mentioned that his mother would kill him if he had to fire me. Suddenly it hit me. They were related. Paul and I walked out, and I turned to him. I inquired about the 20%, asking if it was accurate. He put his arm around me and reassured me that I shouldn't worry. He had me covered. I queried whether I was facing termination or some form of discipline. Paul responded, calling me a dumbass and stating that I was getting promoted. He put his arm around me and kissed me on the side of the head. I retorted, expressing my frustration that he could have informed me beforehand. Paul chuckled, saying that the whole night was much funnier this way. He mentioned how he missed me, calling me kid, and suggested we go get some breakfast. I remarked about the early hour, questioning who eats breakfast at 8:30 in the morning. He said that he does, and commented that I still have a lot to learn about enjoying life. He added that it didn't surprise him given my past actions, mentioning a time when I got liquored up on sake and got into a fist fight with a monkey at the hot springs in Japan, ultimately getting my ass kicked. We ended up having a great time. We talked about work and what was going to happen. We discussed Yan, and he advised me that I really should meet her and get closure. He said we both did stupid things, but we are good people. Once I get closure, then I will be able to move forward in my future without an anchor of emotion holding me back. He said once that is resolved, then we can talk about my employment future. So that was checked off the list. At least I still have a job. Dad is looking good. There is still the matter of Jan, which has been consistently on my mind. I unblocked her on Facebook and scrolled through to prepare myself for what is to come. I sent a private message and asked if we could meet for dinner sometime soon. We exchanged pleasantries and agreed to meet for dinner in the next few days. That will be my next update. Jan and I agreed to meet at a restaurant a few hours after she got off work. Going into this, I was afraid of two things, that my anger would remain and I would act accordingly, or my love for her would remain and I would act accordingly. I was hoping to find a comfortable middle ground in the gray area. All my plans flew out the window the moment she walked through the door. She looked wonderful. She smiled and walked over, and my stomach was in my throat. I wasn't this nervous when we lost our virginity together. We shared a short, awkward hug, and I could smell my favorite perfume on her. Is she about to love bomb me or play some emotional tricks? Is she in another relationship and here to show me what I missed? No rings on her finger, not even the one I gave her. We talked about my dad first, and she told me she always checked in on him when she was on shift, and assured me that the surgeon for the upcoming bypass was one of the best. We kicked around small talk, discussing her extreme workload during the pandemic, and what I experienced being locked down in Tokyo. I was on the verge of breaking down. While I may have seemed calm and collected on the outside, I was falling apart inside. I believed I needed this conversation to address my emotions and finally move forward. It felt like we were avoiding the major issue for far too long, and then she looked at me, and her expression changed. The rest of the conversation is somewhat hazy, but I'll do my best to recall it. Jen expressed her remorse, saying she was sorry for what happened and for causing me pain. I questioned her sincerity, asking if she was sorry for being caught or genuinely remorseful for the harm inflicted on me. She insisted that she was sorry for the pain it caused me and for what it did to our lives and our future. I probed further, wondering if her actions were driven by insecurity or a desire to punish me for the people I associated with when we weren't yet a couple. She admitted that it could be both, but she wanted to convey that any other man in her life before we were engaged, she never loved like she loved me. Later, she brought up her ex, Tim, who cheated on her, feeling inadequate compared to her feelings for me. I confessed that I never knew this, and to be honest, I didn't feel bad that he cheated. I just didn't want her to know I was going to sleep with another man. I thought I could emotionally detach from it, and even if she found out, we could work through it like we did with everything else before. Reflecting on the situation, I added that she was wrong. It was probably the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I didn't need her to be perfect or experienced. I just needed her to be mine. None of them, Jen. Every single one of them could never measure up to what I felt with her. But now I'm starting to wonder if it was a genuine feeling, or just the result of the dream our families had for us, or the expectations we placed on ourselves. The conversation started to get emotional, and Jen excused herself to go to the restroom to collect herself. We were in a moderately sized restaurant with only a few occupied tables. Paul was with us for support, as some of you had suggested, and he strategically positioned himself in the separate lounge area. I looked over for some encouragement or a thumbs up, but to my surprise, he was deeply engaged in an animated conversation with two attractive ladies, laughing and gesturing enthusiastically. He finally glanced over and gave me an inquisitive thumbs up, and I nodded to signal that everything was okay. He responded with a smile and then cheekily flipped me the middle finger before returning to his other activities. This guy? Seriously. Jen returned and we resumed our conversation. She asked if there was anything I wanted to ask about that night. I responded that it can't be undone and doesn't matter. Jen reassured me, mentioning that nothing happened. She wasn't even sure if she could have gone through with it. When I called the room, it scared the crap out of her, and she rushed down to the lobby, but I was already gone. I reiterated that it doesn't matter now. I'm not there to dwell on the past. I want us to focus on moving forward. I asked Jen if she could forgive me. I added that, of course, I can forgive her, and I do forgive her. She's not a terrible person, she just made a terrible series of choices that led us here. It's not all her fault, and I acknowledge that I should have been more open and understanding of her concerns as well. During this conversation, I cycled through a range of emotions, from love to anger to regret. Part of me wanted to shout at her, while another part wanted to take her home and pretend none of this had ever happened. In the weeks leading up to this conversation, I had been watching YouTube videos on Reddit, where men were punishing themselves for the much worse cheating their significant others had done. I was determined not to be that guy. I looked at her, contemplating the old man's words about outward appearances, painted faces, painted nails, and form-fitting dresses. Did I truly know her? If this was her outward appearance, was her mind the same? Were all their minds the same? I steeled myself and asked, "What now? Is there anything in the future for us?" She recalled a childhood memory, mentioning she wanted me to remember when we were kids, walking home from the park, and a vicious dog approached us. She instinctively got in front of me to protect me, to save me. The owner called the dog back and it ran away. It was only a matter of seconds, but when you're 9, that's pretty scary. I responded that all these years later, I stood in front of her, loving her and protecting her from whatever might come our way. But this time, when I stood in front of her, giving her everything I had, she stuck a knife in my back, just like the frog and the scorpion. My words hit her hard, and she lowered her head, shedding a few tears. I wasn't finished. I needed to express everything. I continued, telling Jan that I was sorry. She took out the ring box and slid it across the table to me. I said I didn't want it. I was angry. I asked her if she thought I wanted to sit there with my heart pounding and her crying. I wanted to be home, playing with the baby we should have had by now. I couldn't recall much of what was said in the next few minutes as she began sobbing and covered her face with her hands. I'd said some hurtful things in my life, but that one took the cake. I apologized, acknowledging that I'd gone too far. This helped me snap out of my anger. The rest of our conversation calmed down, and after venting my frustrations, we had a more normal discussion about life and the future. Reconciliation was off the table. When she got up to leave, we hugged for a long time. I'll leave it here and finish the rest tomorrow. These past few days have been exhausting.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
Story 2. I got cheated on after a 4-year relationship. And here's the backstory. My girlfriend, who's 24, and I, also 24, had been together for over 4 years. When we first got together, she was still recovering from a previous abusive relationship, both mentally and physically. I played a supportive role in helping her heal during that time, and we grew very close. The idea of her cheating on me seemed unimaginable. Throughout our relationship, we had many discussions about infidelity, and we both firmly believed that cheating isn't a solution to any problem. Instead, we believed in open communication. I trusted her completely because she had never shown any interest in other guys while we were together. However, over the last year, she became somewhat distant and started engaging in activities I didn't know she was interested in, perhaps even surprising herself. Primarily, she began going to clubs with her best friend, claiming she wanted to dance. I made it clear that clubbing wasn't my thing, and I didn't want to go just to be her bodyguard. Initially, I didn't think much of it, assuming she and her friend could handle any unwanted attention from guys. After a few weeks, though, I noticed she received a message from someone named Chris, name changed for privacy reasons, on her phone. The "I think" part when she mentioned his name struck me as odd, so I asked her about it. She explained that a random guy had complimented her looks and asked for her number, and she gave it to him, citing that she was drunk at the time. This incident triggered my suspicions, which led to a confrontation. I believed she was only going to the clubs to have fun with her friend, albeit naively. Our argument escalated, with her accusing me of being overly jealous and controlling. My point was that she might not have control over her actions when drunk, and I worried about her safety in situations where she could be taken advantage of by guys. Although we somewhat patched things up after that fight, some lingering resentment remained. She began to accuse me of being judgmental whenever she shared sensitive information. Around this time, I started secretly checking her messages. She continued to chat with the guy from the club, but it seemed mostly harmless, just occasional, casual conversation initiated by him every few weeks or so. Jumping ahead to a few days ago, it had been a while since I last checked her messages. I thought our relationship was on a good path as I consistently invested time and effort into it. She still appeared somewhat distant, but she explained it as stress and fatigue from her university classes and work. I believed her because I was also feeling the strain from those responsibilities, but I guess everyone has different stress levels. However, one night while she was sleeping, I couldn't help but decide to peek at her messages to see what was going on. I discovered a recent chat with that Chris guy, the same one from the previous night when I thought she had gone to bed early. At 3 a.m., she was sending him pictures of herself at the club, claiming she was drunk. I was seething with anger, but I didn't confront her right away. I continued scrolling through her messages and stumbled upon another chat with a random guy, again with a name I couldn't recall. Their conversations seemed to have an intimate tone, not quite explicit, but not entirely innocent either. This prompted me to go back to the beginning of their conversation. 3 months ago, she had given this guy her number after they met on the street. A few days later, she unexpectedly told him to keep their bedroom activities a secret from anyone. That was the moment I lost my composure. I woke her up and asked if she would confess if she had cheated on me. She replied with an emphatic yes, of course. After a few moments of silence, she asked for her phone. I handed it to her and she left the room in a huff. Since then, she has explained to me what transpired. On that fateful night, she got extremely drunk with her friend at her place. She was feeling down about our relationship, believing she couldn't communicate with me, and that I didn't allocate enough time for her, despite my efforts to spend time with her whenever possible. She went for a solitary walk that night and messaged the guy. She then went to his place where she kissed him, embraced him, and slept in his arms. Or at least, that's what she confessed to me. She's now desperately trying to reconcile with me, professing her love and vowing it will never happen again. She's telling me that she's willing to seek therapy and put effort into repairing our relationship, mending all that's broken between us. I'm getting closer to believing her, but my heart is still shattered. I'm uncertain about whether I can continue this relationship, especially knowing that we were progressing towards living together, marriage, and all those future plans, while she was keeping this from me. What should I do? Is what she did so unforgivable that I shouldn't give her a second chance? Should I put my pride aside and take her back? I want to express my gratitude for all your advice and support. I've made the decision to cut off all ties with her because I don't want to live in fear and trauma alongside her. I just hope that things will gradually get easier from here on out.